systems and structures to see if organizational changes are necessary to achieve the desired outcomes as outlined by the district's existing equity policy. Although we have taken many foundational steps over the last month and beyond to well position ourselves to move forward, I want to remind everyone that the hardest work still remains ahead. I've shared this before and I will share it again. Equity is meaningful work. Meaningful work requires a significant investment of time and a high level of commitment from everyone in order for it to be successful. I look forward to a robust conversation today, since the board's input is critical to ensuring myself and my leadership team and the district as a whole can implement the appropriate next steps identified today. And with that, I will turn it over to the Chief of Staff, Mr. Ed Tierney.
Chairman Barbieri, Vice Chair Mrs. Brill, school board members, Dr. Fenoy. I am very pleased to be here this afternoon to help facilitate Part 2 in our series of board workshops on vision, mission, equity, and strategic plan. Joining me at the table today is our own Ms. Kathy Villavicencio. Joining us remotely is Ms. Mary Ferry Fertakis. The board has worked individually with Mary. You've worked as a collective, and I'm very comfortable saying we are fortunate to have her as a partner. We appreciate her being here this afternoon, and we look forward to working with her throughout the afternoon on this important work. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Tierney. Can you hear me?
Yes,
sure.
we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to lead us off with a practice that we started at our last meeting, which is to do a land recognition. And part of the reason for that is that we cannot have any discussion about equity without framing it in the context of the people groups, our indigenous tribes, who were the first people to experience inequities when Europeans started to come to this continent. So you are all on the lands at this, the historic lands right now of the Seminole and the Tequista tribes, and I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Duwamish. I gave you some historical background on both the Seminoles and the Tequista and the Duwamish at our last gathering. So I will move forward into the land recognition. I would like to honor the tribes who have been the historic stewards and caretakers of the lands and the waterways that we live on, that we play on, that we have benefited from and continue to benefit from, and acknowledge that our education system has not served them well in the history of this country and continues to cause problems for them based on historical issues that have happened related to genocide. And at that point now, I will turn it back over to Mr. Tierney.
Thank you, Mary. At the November 10th board workshop, the board made it clear that prior to embarking on the strategic planning process, the board wanted a strong foundation upon which to build that plan. That foundation is an analysis of our vision and mission to determine if we're still comfortable with it. It's a definition of equity, which will then transition to the creation of our strategic plan and then operationalizing that plan to make measurable, achievable goals that will guide this district over the next half a decade. So you can see the short-term planning process, define mission and vision, will transition ultimately to the long-term planning process of the strategic plan and how we operationalize that. The next slide is your agenda. We'll go over that very briefly. I just want to call your attention to bullet 2, the workshop. That's the most important word on that agenda. This is designed to be a true workshop today. This is not a staff presentation. We have a significant amount of time reserved for the board to analyze and discuss vision, mission, determine if you're still comfortable with that. If not, determine what it should be. We'll revisit the board identified barriers to achieving equitable system. We'll discuss the proposed revisions to mission and vision, should there be any. We'll look at a timeline that's embedded in this proposal already and make sure the board approves, and look at next steps. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Mary for check-in.
You're muted, Mary.
Thank you. Okay, so we are also going to check in with each other as we did last time. And Mr. Barbieri, I'm going to have to rely on you to help move this along because I cannot see all the members of the board with the structure that we have. And so what I would like to do is if you could go around your table, and I'll leave you to start at whichever end you would like to at Mr. Barbieri's direction. And our check-in is I'd like to know if you could state a word or a phrase on how you're showing up to our workshop today.
Rather than start at one end or the other, anybody want to go first? Ms. McQuinn's at the far end. Go ahead.
Don't want all my words used first. Appreciative that we are being included in revising or whatever the strategic plan up front, and that it will be centered around equity. So appreciative.
Ms. Ayala?
Hi, Mary. I'm showing up refreshed and empowered, ready to get to phase 2 of our educational session together to reframe how we can better serve our community.
Ms. Whitfield?
Thank you. I'm actually super excited. I loved your sample missions. I thought that was really, it was really hopeful, and I can't wait to incorporate some of your ideas into our current mission. So I'm very glad to be here, and I'm glad that we are moving forward on this journey. Thanks.
Mrs. Andrews?
Motivated to share my opinions with my fellow board members, motivated to continue to listen and review what other districts have been doing, motivated to make some changes for the school district of Palm Beach County as it relates to making sure that we provide the equity that's needed for all of our children and our staff and community.
Dr. Robinson?
My word is skeptical.
Vice Chairwoman Brill?
Thank you, and my word is enthusiastic. I am enthusiastic regarding this new course that we are going to be traveling along.
And I'm last, Mary. I'm just hoping that this works for us because since I've been on the board, we revised the mission and vision one other time, and it didn't seem like it made much of a difference. So I'm hoping this time we actually get to where we need to get.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And at this point, we're going to pull up the slides that we have for you. And again, Mr. Barbieri, I'm going to need to rely on you, since you can see your colleagues, that if there are comments as we're going through, that you can raise those for me. So the next thing I want to do is refresh our memory about the norms that we agreed to for having equity conversations and having this conversation. And so as a reminder, we are here to speak our truth, and that what that actually means is that all perspectives are valid and all perspectives are partial. I can speak from the perspective of a white middle-class woman. It is my lived experience and it's valid. It's also only one of many, many perspectives. And once I've had the opportunity to share it, I need to sit back and listen to the many other perspectives that are represented in our conversation today. The next one is to stay engaged. You've already been going for a while, and I know as a former board member that this is, it can be challenging to stay engaged, but this is critical work for moving your district forward to make it so this time, as has already been said. So just encourage you to stick with us for the next couple of hours. The next one is to expect to experience discomfort. As I've shared with you, I feel that I will have failed as a facilitator if everyone who's participating today doesn't experience some level of discomfort in our time together as we're talking about things that hopefully will be causing you to think differently and challenging perhaps some beliefs and practices, and that we should be embracing that discomfort because it means we're learning and in a learning space. Also want us to be aware of our intent and owning our impact. We may not intend to say something that's that lands as harmful on someone, but if it does, just own it, say thank you, and we move on, because when we know better, we can do better. And it's a gift when people will share with us how they may have been harmed by something that's been said. And it takes courage to do that too. The accept and expect non-closure. We are on a White Western time frame today to get some things done and to try and get you to some consensus on a couple of items. But at the same time, we're going to get as far as we get, because this is an ongoing conversation and you get as far as you get, and we have to be okay if we can't tie everything up in a nice bow at the end of our time together. And then maintaining our learner stance and being in a learning space to move forward together. So now I'm going to hand it off to Kathy.
All right, so before we dig in, I think it's important just to frame, as Mary said, there will be some non-closure today, but what things we need from the board to make sure we can keep moving forward. I know there's a holiday break, but there are several of us who are working behind the scenes to make sure we can keep the momentum when we return and make sure that all these pieces fit together. You know, you heard about budget, you heard about the student academic support plan, the strategic plan, all these things need to coalesce, or, you know, we won't get to where, you know, the board has said they want to be in terms of changing outcomes for all of our students in the county. So today, Mary will take us through a discussion of the mission and vision statements. Very excited to hear board members already talking about some of the pre-work that we sent along for y'all to start thinking about this prior to today's meeting. And then after you debrief that pre-work, trying to just determine the extent of revisions, definitely starting that process now, but you know, of course we are time limited, so determining how much more time the board will need to engage in this piece specifically. And then as Mr. Tierney shared, reviewing an overall proposed timeline, again, talking about how all these pieces fit together. We're really trying to be forward thinking at the direction of our superintendent to make sure that we can just keep it moving forward and make sure that it's sustainable and long term. So again, you'll see there at the bottom, your input is needed today to make sure we have that clear direction so we can you know, have our implementation piece ready to go after the holiday break, and y'all can see how all of this work is moving forward based on your feedback, particularly as it relates to the strategic plan. So without further ado, Mary, please take us on our mission vision journey.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kathy. So where we're going to start now is you did some wonderful work at our last session to identify different types of barriers that you were seeing when you were asked what would an equitable system look like and what needs to be overcome for that to happen. I committed to taking these back and looking at categories, or to be able to categorize them as there were themes that were emerging. And these were the four that seemed very clear in all of the comments that you raised. So you were provided with a document as part of your pre-work that highlighted the four categories that seemed to be very clear to me that things were falling out into. And I just wanted to very briefly go over, you know, some why about that, and want to give you an opportunity if you have any comments about this overall. First of all, every single one of your comments was included in the documents that you received, and some of them are repeated because they fell into a couple of categories. And so that's why you will see them, because I did not want to lose any of your thoughts. And I also included in there because I wanted to tie this back to our prior learning so that we get used to thinking in structures, and that I put in parentheses when we did our terminology definitions and had that conversation, there were these four categories incorporate several of these different types of racism. And so again, wanted to tie it back to your prior learning. So for the changing people's belief systems, which is culture change, this isn't going to be involving elements of interpersonal, structural, and institutional racism that need to be addressed. For your equitable resource allocation category, and I do want to point out that, as I stated before, resources are more than dollars. You've just had a budget presentation that is, you know, highlighting what some of the challenges are going to be. So I would just like to remind us that the resources that we actually have are more than just the dollars. They include the power and the privilege that you bring with your positions. It includes the way time is used, the way your spaces are used, and how your people are distributed through your system. So all of these are resources you have available to you. The third category was opportunities and access, and this was encompassing not just academics, but extracurriculars, and the fact that you can have a nice list of opportunities for your students, but if they don't have the means to access them, it's the same as if they're not actually there. And so having some intentional conversations around what barriers are existing around both opportunity and access going forward will be in order as part of your work. And then the fourth one was social, emotional, and whole child needs, and that this is impacting both your staff and the types of trauma that they've been experiencing during our time of COVID for the last 9 months, as well as the impact and how that's rippling out to your students and your families. So that was the reason why these were broken out the way they were. And I just would like to give you an opportunity to, if anyone would like to comment on how this landed on them, and if this is something that makes sense to you to be a reference as you're moving forward. And Mr. Barbieri, I'll have to lean on you for calling on people.
Yes, ma'am. I'm watching the board members to see if any of them want to speak on anything. Doesn't look like any comment. Oh, Mrs. Whitfield.
I just wanted to jump in real quick on theme 1, because I think that's something that we can really work on here as a district. The mandatory racial equity PD for all staff, I think, to me, when we were talking about that, just making a list of expectations from the board to our staff that says where we would like them to be, and making that a requirement rather than right now. I think all we do is we ask people if they would like to, and so I think that we can change the culture from here only if we really do send down our expectations. So I just I love the way that was all written and all the different comments that the board had, and I think it's a great theme in changing the culture for this district.
Mrs. Andrews.
I think when we talk about changing people's belief system, we can train a lot of people, but if they don't really believe or trust or have confidence in the trainer or the system itself, we go nowhere. And so I believe that people have to have trust. They have to be given the opportunity to be comfortable, to share their feelings, their knowledge, and you have to work together. So I just think when we talk about the culture, our culture a lot of times goes with going to a workshop and getting trained, and then you go back and it's over with, or you're supposed to emulate what you've been trained and do the job that you have to do. But it takes a lot more in-depth work to be able to change the culture, and you have to understand the folks who you're trying to work with, and they have to understand you.
Ms. Ayala.
Something that stood out to me and was, I guess, hopeful and positive was, I think from the theme shared here by all of us, we think a lot of the same things need to be addressed. So that gave me some hope that we can land on a successful path moving forward, because a lot of the categories, we say very similar things. Obviously, there are distinctions, but I think we all know what the issues are, and getting to the point of instituting a culture that no longer accepts what isn't tolerable anymore is where we want to go. But I did feel positive that at least we were on a very decent foundation for where we want to see the district in the future.
Mary, I see no more hands if you want to move on.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Ayala, for that comment, because I was hoping that by doing it this way, that would be one of the things that would become apparent, is that you have a lot of convergence on the board in the things that you want to see. Your approaches or specific priorities may be different, but they definitely come under these umbrella areas. And I think that is really a positive place to be able to start and to continue working forward. Okay, we're going to dive into now some work on your mission and vision, and I do want to just acknowledge up front that this is we are starting a little bit later than intended, and that you have already been doing some work, and we're also pushing up on the fact that it is the 6th day of Hanukkah, and I just wanted to be cognizant of the time. And so, Ms. Brill, I would just invite you to keep us on track if it looks like we're getting off a little bit, so that we can keep moving and be respectful of different people's constraints right now and things that are important to them. So with that, Kathy, can you pull up the slide presentation again? And we're going to do a little framing around the mission and vision, much of which you already have with you with the pre-work documents that were sent out. I hope that was helpful for you. This is a best practice for being able to maximize the time that the board has together by doing some of this work and reflective work, so that we can come together and hit the ground running and hopefully be efficient in our use of your time and your effort. So what we have with just, again, making it very clear in defining terms, what mission does and what vision does. A mission should be describing the core work and responsibility of the school district, not the core work of the board. So this is your global umbrella that you're working under and what you're trying to address. The vision is a way to describe your preferred future. And it's generally done in a 5-year plan, which is what you are planning to do with your upcoming strategic plan process. The vision can be range anywhere from, with some of the examples I provided to you, 1 or 2 sentences to an actual page-long statement where there are specific things that that people, the board wants to call out, that are the how that the vision is going to be being worked towards. And many times there is a tagline, or there is something that people use as a phrase to express it. And I would be remiss if I didn't raise something for you right now. And so if you haven't experienced discomfort to this point, some of you will with what I'm about to say. But I would invite you to take a look at this slide and the tagline that is on the slides. I don't know how long it's been in place, but it says more of everything you want for your child. And we're talking about equity. And in our definition of equity, equity is based on need. It is not based on what we want. And I'm looking at this, and again, as an outsider looking in, what I'm seeing on this is that children and students aren't actually centered in this. This is focused on the you being parents, guardians, others. And so I couldn't not comment on it as I was watching this, because this is part of the branding, it's part of the messaging, and this is something that you would need to interrogate as to whether this is actually reflective of what you're trying to do in creating an equitable system that serves each and every child.
Hold on, Mary, Dr. Robinson.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thanks for pointing that out. But can we center around the word equity? Because I don't remember, I have a faulty memory, but at least today we didn't center around the word equity. Can we make sure we all have a common definition of what equity is before we try to put it in our mission or vision or anything?
And thank you for raising that. In the timeline that we were looking at, one of the things that you don't have in the district is a working definition of equity. And because a mission and a vision does not define what equity is, this is work that we can do. It was made very clear with the board's input. We can actually go to the next slide, Kathy. It was made very clear in the board's initial input that it was noted that equity was not included in the vision statement, though the word is in your mission statement. And so what can happen is that in because you're not defining it here, you can do the work of saying, this is what we want to be accomplishing as you're writing your mission and your vision. And in the timeline that's going to be presented, you'll see that the work related to defining equity for the district is going to be going on simultaneously. And that when that definition is completed, that it's got to be added as an asterisk after the word in your mission and your vision, and underneath it, your definition that you're working from is placed there. Does that, does that help for today?
Yeah, you're the expert in this area, but to me, that's like using a word in the definition of the word. I mean, I'll walk with you, but it doesn't make sense to me to not at least have a conceptual definition of what equity is. I get that down the road, I mean, we're really gonna have to dig into all the multiple variables that, at least the way I see equity, lead to equity, to equity, the noun, as opposed to equity, the verb, right? But I mean, I'm just not really sure that we all have conceptually the same thing. And so, I mean, so I'm gonna put it out there. The definition I'm operating with is that we bless them according to their needs, that we provide the resources and the system, whatever the system has to offer, to get each child to where whatever our stated expectation is. That's what I'm operating out of. I don't know. I just think that we need to conceptually agree to something.
I thank you for providing your definition, and you've actually hit on the core piece of what equity is. It is based on need. That is the key word within any definition of equity, and every one of the board members identified different areas of need when they were doing the identifying what the barriers would be to have an equitable system. So you are starting from that commonality. The issue for all of you is how, when you're talking about need, what are the elements that are incorporated in that? And that is what should be encompassed in the definition that is being worked on. I mean, you are fortunate that you have a committee that has been engaged in this work and has been doing some pre-work with this that is going to be also presented to the board. And in the conversation we had on December 4th, like I said, it was we made a clear distinction between equality and equity. Equality is based on sameness, equity is based on need, and there was consensus around that as a foundational concept. So my hope is that by taking that as the foundational concept, as we're looking at addressing needs, that this is what's going to inform how you we're looking at both your mission and your vision, and then getting to the specifics of what your definition of what equity means for your district. Will that address your concerns for the purposes of our work today?
She said yes. Mrs. Whitfield?
I just wanted to go back a little bit to your tagline comment. It's funny because I was actually looking at it today in one of the PowerPoints earlier before I came here, and it kind of didn't sit with me great either. And I think really it's more about marketing, and it's really showing a time maybe 4 years ago when we were really in competition with the charters, and that was a conversation we had constantly. So it was trying to show that we were, better than the best choice for them. But for staff, I'm curious, is that part of the discussion for the equity work, is to change things like the way we market ourselves?
I think that will come out of this discussion and further discussions and workshops on how we'll change marketing behavior, language, budget, organization. So certainly I think it's possible,
Okay.
probable.
Thank you.
All right, Mary, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Ms. Kathy, if you can pull back up the slides that we were on. Okay, so going back to what you had originally stated, where you raised a few issues. The pre-work that you were given was to help you dive into this a little bit more and to try and coalesce some thoughts that you have around what this could look like. And so our task today is not to completely either rewrite or wordsmith what your current mission and vision are, but to surface either thoughts, words, concepts that should be considered in any revision to these two foundational pieces of your work. And so you were given a couple of questions to reflect on that, again, was trying to cue this up for you to be able to have a fairly robust conversation in the time that we have by doing a little pre-thinking around any considerations, words and language. And then we're going to we have a Google document that we've prepared, since you need to do everything in full group setting. And I think, Kathy, if you can pull that up. What our intent is with this is to provide just the framework for you to be able to have the conversation, looking first at your mission and any thoughts, concepts, words that you would like to consider as part of a revision. And Kathy will be our note taker and will be adding these in. So we've set this up with your current mission as a way to have a reference point, and then taking the information that you had a chance to either read or reflect on in the pre-work to generate a list of some of these things, with the mission. And then we're going to do the same thing for your vision, with the addition of wanting to get input from you on whether you are interested in a vision that is a short couple of sentences like you currently have, or whether you would like to give some direction on categories of the how that you want to see the vision implemented, that would each have a short paragraph, like a couple of the examples that I provided for you. So that's what we're going to be spending the next 40 to 45 minutes on, to try and generate some things that will then be taken out to work on, and to get some consensus from you on words, phrases, and concepts that are resonating with you that you'd like to see included. So let's go back to the top of the screen, and we'll dive in on the discussion about mission. And Mr. Barbieri, this is where I will need to defer to you to call on your colleagues as they'd like to state things. And then just remember, we have somebody taking notes in real time, so you can all see this. And if we need to repeat something, then please bear with us so that we can capture your thoughts.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thanks. I like I said, I looked at this yesterday and got really excited about one of the missions. I just want to start off with just saying, I was talking to my husband about this, and he said, well, what's your mission now? And I was like, it's world-class education, something, something, something. And I was here when we made that. I was part of it the last time we did this. So I felt like if I couldn't recite it to him and I helped to make it, that doesn't really bode well for the length of it. And I feel like a mission should be short and sweet and really say something. So what I wanted to say is I really love the first one that you put in there about every student in Highline Public Schools is known by name, strength, and need, and graduates prepared for the future they choose. It's so student-centered. It's so short. I actually really like that it's a very low reading level. Every word in it is really easy to remember and say. And so I think that really speaks to every child in our district so that everyone could see it, something like that. And I love the strength, name, and need. It just meant so much to me because it really speaks to all the different groups we have. So that's just an opinion I had when I read it. I felt very strongly about that one. Some of the other ones are longer and they kind of include a lot of other different pieces, but I would love it if it became a thing in the district where everyone felt like they understood our mission and understood their role in working towards it. And really, this talks about the kids, and that is just so important. I mean, I could see it on walls everywhere we go through the district, so something along those lines.
Vice Chairwoman
Thank you.
Brew?
Just one quick comment. I wanted to comment on your noticing the language in it and the accessible language. This is a school district that has 120 languages spoken in it. That was very intentional.
Ms. Brew?
Thank you. So Mrs. Whitfield and I were very much along the same line of thought. I prefer a shorter mission statement. I felt that it was too verbose to start with. And I was trying to wordsmith it and come up with something. And actually, when I was looking at it, for me, I mean, what I looked at, and you may not, all of you may not agree, but I was thinking the school district of Palm Beach County is committed to empower each student to reach his or her highest potential. That's taking the words from what we have and just focusing in on that as our mission, because I think that sums it up.
Ms. McQuinn, then Dr. Robinson?
Reflecting now on what we opened with was saying our school district is committed to. The examples of the equity-centered mission statements begin with every student will, or we are committed to. To me, being we, that's just implied inclusive of everybody, we. So I think it's something we want to start with, because both of ours begin with the school district of Palm Beach County.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. I also like the first example of the mission statement. What I think of is we see you, right? This actually came to me from some school visits, but where we see you, we see the gifts and talents that you bring. We see your greatness, your wholeness as a human, and we want to help develop that, or we want to develop that to what you choose it is, not what I don't particularly like the language about full potential, because I don't know who's determining what your potential is, right? But I like the one about the prepared for the future that they dream of. I love that. And I think that this example embodies the we see you kind of philosophy. So far that's the favorite one I've heard or thought of. Thank you.
Ms. Ayala?
Reading through the mission statement, for me, something that I think has been touched on previously, it has the word student in it once. It just doesn't focus enough on what our actual mission is. And looking right in front of us, focus on the prize is ahead. Right up top, a quote from a former superintendent of the district. And I think that talking about language that incorporates how are we going to break down any and all barriers, to Dr. Robinson's point that potential can be subjective, and we have to make sure that we're aware of that. How are we fostering an inviting environment for everyone? And how are we delivering for our students and our employees, regardless of circumstances that surround them? And something that I noticed in the, I hope I don't butcher this, North Clackamas schools?
North Clackamas.
Thank you. The link that you sent on their HR page, it said, the North Clackamas School District strives to create an inclusive and racially affirming environment that welcomes and values the diversity of our staff and students. We foster fairness, equity, and inclusion to create a workplace environment where everyone is treated with respect and dignity. And to me, that was so significant because, as Dr. LaCava knows, our HR departments are the core of our culture. They're the core of any organization's culture. And I think that starting where we start with students and they're the priority, but it has to, for me, extend out to every single person in this building, every single person in our schools, and to everyone that interfaces with us. So that one really stuck out to me. And I just think we have to make sure that we're including language in our mission statement that is much more clear and concise and inclusive on what all of this mumbo jumbo actually means when it comes to student achievement and support.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. And I was looking at Roseville area schools, equity vision, and it reminded me that we need to make sure that we're respectful of a learning environment for every student. And I think about the family and the staff members, regardless of the race, gender, and identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, ability from the home, or first language, religion. I think we've got to dig deep, because when we think about equity, we're talking about the needs of each individual, and they kind of spelled it out of all the different kinds of children and families that they had in their school district, and that it's going to be respectful learning environment for every student for success. And so you've got to kind of know who your students are, know where they come from, and make sure you're providing the necessary academic experiences for all of them for a high level of success.
Mrs. McQuinn?
I'd like for us to decide early on whether we're going to start with our students will, or, in other words, does it focus on students, or does it also include our employees, our parents, our communities? I think we need to make that decision, because it can get really long, and it shouldn't be really long. The strategies that we employ can be long and specific. So I think we need to make that decision.
Mary, let me ask you a question. Shouldn't the mission statement somewhere in there use the word teach? I mean, that's our core business, is to teach. So shouldn't somewhere it identify that we teach?
This is why mission statements are very specific to your district. And if that is, again, looking at what missions do, it's looking at what the core work and responsibility of the district is. And so that is a very valid point to be making, that the word teach or learning, there's a difference between teaching and learning, and how do you want that communicated?
Okay, Mrs. Whitfield and then Mrs. McQuinn.
I just wanted to address Mrs. McQuinn's comment, because I think it's really important. Sometimes this meeting can sometimes exist without students being talked about as the primary focus. Sometimes we get lost in the adult stuff. And so I really think the opportunity for us here to really refocus ourselves on students is a great one. Like, I think we should really put the mission of this district as students, because we know that the adults will kind of be considered in that process, in the way that they serve as students. I don't want us to turn into, mentioning each employee group or even employees as the main part of our mission, because I really think they always get recognized. The issue is the kids. We don't always make sure that we probably make them the priority. So I think as a decision, we should lean towards just students in the mission.
Dr. Robinson? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. McQuinn, you were after me. Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Response to teach. We can teach all day long, but students don't necessarily learn. So I would rather focus on student learning.
Okay, understand. Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. So I know I'm upsetting the apple cart a bit, but I think we need to start with the portrait of a graduate.
What? I'm sorry?
I think we need to start with the portrait of a graduate. What do we want young people, what skills, talents, characteristics do we want of our graduates? And then, in my mind, that's the equity point where we're trying to go. And then I think our mission and vision connects us to that. Or at least that's how I see it. It focuses on the students, but then we don't have to say all that stuff in the mission statement. I do think it should be short. I think it should be student focused. I think our purpose, I know our core, what our core business is teaching and learning, but we're really, 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 really much more than that, right? And what I've been pushing for 20 years is for us to embrace that, and not to do everything, but to connect to others to help create this, to take every student and move them to this, whatever this definition, this portrait of a graduate is. And then if we focus on that, that's your mission, that's your focus, that's your prize. So that's it, the portrait of the graduate. And then when we back map, we can look at the gifts and blessings each child has or does not have, and figure out what we need to do, you know, individually and collectively to get that child to that point. And that's where equity, the verb, comes in. That's equity, the noun that I'm talking about here. But I don't know, that's just the way my brain processes it. I just can't really figure out what the mission and vision should be unless I know where I'm trying to go.
So you're not upsetting the apple cart at all, and I'm tracking with you. And what you're talking about with the portrait of a graduate is actually where the vision piece would be coming in of what you want to see. So your portrait of a graduate, what are they going to graduate, with, who they are, the skills that they take with them. You're absolutely correct that that's a great way to frame this, looking at here's what our outcome is that we're desiring, and then how do we backwards map that through our system to ensure that it's happening. And so that is a place where people look at for their vision statement, where some of those, making it longer because the mission is intended to be short, the vision you can very much expound on. And it could be that one of your approaches would be, we're looking at this portrait of a graduate, this is what we want to see happen, and this is how we're going to get there through the vision. So I would like to capture what you just said related to the portrait of a graduate, and would you be okay with us moving it into the box related to vision as a place and a concept that would work? Would you be all right with us doing that?
Yes. You hear me?
Yep. You're generating awesome thoughts here. There's only one thing I would suggest as a piece of whatever your final wording is that for purposes of inclusion, to avoid using things that are obviously gender-based, like his or her, and the preferred terminology is they or theirs.
Another one.
Go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
So, despite the fact that I've been part of mission and vision statements multiple times, I still don't understand the difference, so I just follow you guys with this. But the language that Ms. Ayala read, that racially affirming, is important to me. And I really think that helps to get to what I see as some of our core obstacles.
Ms. McQuinn, then Mrs. Whitfield.
I love this stuff. So, if correct me if I'm wrong, but I after all these years also, sometimes I stumble over the difference. I've even trained at mission and vision. Okay, so the mission is short, it's what we dream. And then the vision is how we're going to get there. And so I see our racial identity, and I know I have the word wrong there, as being part of our vision. Because, again, every student will graduate prepared for the future they dream, going back to that. It should be short. We ought to be able to see it, say it. And then the vision would include the other stuff.
Mrs. Whitfield.
Thanks. Actually, you just touched on something that's really important to me. When that first line where it was every student is known by name, that kind of jumped out at me as kind of an indicator of the LGBT piece, because I feel like one of the struggles we've had in this district is getting teachers to call kids by the name that they choose. And so to put in there a piece about name, and then I heard some of the other ones do have his, her, and I feel like that gets really tricky, so we should either leave it out completely, or we're going to have to throw in a his, her, and theirs, and I think that could get a little cumbersome. So that first one I really like because it doesn't gender anybody in it, and so I like that part of it, that we can really just keep it very equitable from an LGBT perspective.
Go ahead, Mary.
The name piece, I'm really glad you've centered on that, because there's an awful lot that is contained in that. As I mentioned earlier, this is a district that's has 120 languages spoken, and so the issue of people's names is very big. Can you say my name correctly? Have you taken the time to learn, what names mean? And I know, because I'm in the adjacent district, that has been a huge issue for us, and part of our training for staff is to ensure that people's names are honored. It is not up to you to determine what nickname they will be called. So there's a lot, and bringing up the LGBTQIA piece. So there's a lot that's encompassed when using the terminology of saying that we know someone's name.
Ms. McQuinn?
So we could also put that by name in the vision. And I shared with Mary in our individual first meeting that, and this is where I get nervous, Dr. Robinson knows this piece, that I may say this wrong, but I'm going to say it as it happened. When I was, I think, a first-year teacher, it was definitely in my first couple of years teaching, and I had about an equal balance of black students and white students, and I don't remember, this bothers me that I don't remember his exact name, so I'm going to say it's William. But when I was speaking to them, and I said, Will. And he stood up and he said, do not call me out of my name. And that's exactly how he said it. And I learned early on, don't give me a nickname. I'm William. So I do think that's very important.
But Mr. Barber, if I might add, I think this is an interesting one, because my worldview is the same as what Mr. Quinn just examined. My father was very clear to me that your name is Donald. It is not Don. It's not any of those things. And so I've done that to my children. But more important, I think, as a teacher and as an educator, if that's something that we aspire to, it will force behavioral changes in adults. Because now you have to look at someone and ask a question. And I think that would be the goal of something that specific from my perspective.
Dr. Robinson?
And I think that knowing the name is part of my "we see you," right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Because with every name comes a story. And when we know people's stories, it starts to change some things. We start to develop understanding and some empathy. And so all of this is very much tied to both individual work, corporate work, and culture change.
And I would add, I think for all of us, I think, when you think about Italian families, Haitian families, African families, so part of the assimilation into America sometimes is to give up your name. You change it so that other people can say it correctly or spell it correctly. And I think this is, and it's interesting how this has sparked this conversation, because I think for some of our kids, the society or the system makes them not appreciative of their name and their heritage and their value. And so I think something that would seem so small could really help our children build their self-confidence in being able to maybe even research their name, articulate their name. My last name is Fenoy. Okay, well, that's not African. So what's the story behind this black family having a French name, right? And so you start to, well, they must be Haitian. Well, no, that's not. We're not from Haiti, but we may have came through Haiti. So it's interesting how something like this could be such a powerful changer for us, because I think a lot of our kids, you know, again, not maybe intentionally, but sometimes they're embarrassed by their name because it's hard to say, or other people struggle with it, and they say, oh, well, I'll just call you this. So to Ms. McQuinn's point, I think that's a big thing. I got to write that one down. I never thought about it like that.
Dr. Robinson?
Okay, so since we're talking about names, I just feel the need to tell you the story, and I'm gonna try to make it short. So when we had the last workshop, I think it was when the Florida School Board Association lady started, and she asked me what she could call me. I think she asked me if she could call me Deborah or something, and I froze, right? But let me just tell you something. So when I was an intern, I'll try to be brief. When I was an intern, long story short, most of the nurses were on the med-surg floor older than I am, right? And they all called each other by their first names. I called them by their first name. They called me by my first name, right? Until probably 3 weeks into my internship, this older black nurse, and God knows what she must have gone through, right? Because she was older and had been, there like the, only black nurse on the floor, whatever, right? This woman literally grabbed me and threw me into a closet to tell me I must never, ever allow them to call me by my first name because my ancestors fought so that I would have the opportunity to go to medical school. This woman read me the Riot Act. I didn't know this woman, okay, until then, right? But she made it crystal clear to me that my name was Dr. Robinson, and my name was Dr. Robinson because of my ancestors, right? Not me, not my ego. So I just put that out there because I know sometimes I will say Dr. Robinson. There's been times on this dais, not recently, when the board chair referred to me as Deborah, and I said Dr. Robinson, but that was that nurse, whatever her name was, okay, making me stand up for my ancestors. So I want to be just clear about that. It's not an ego thing, right? It's an ancestral thing. So, all right, thank you.
Clarify that, Dr. Robinson. I don't think I've ever called any of you by your first name at a board meeting. I try and always call you by your proper name. So hopefully it wasn't me. You were referring to some other board chair. Go ahead, Mary.
Hey, this is a really powerful conversation. And I'm glad that these pieces are coming out, and isn't it interesting, all the things that have been raised by the few simple words, know each student by name, strength, and need. And so there's a lot wrapped up in it, and you've generated quite a bit. And in the interest of balance of time to be able to talk about mission a little bit, I'm going to ask if we can move forward to that piece of this work, and we're going to continue doing exactly what we were just doing, with the fact that we're starting with one piece already, which is the concept of portrait of a student. And so again, we want to generate from you and surface some things from you related to words, phrases, and concepts to be considered for revisions. And then if there's a desire to make your vision longer so that you can really expound on some of the things you've daylighted that you want covered, that's a place that you can do that in several different paragraphs. Your vision can be as long as you want. Again, this is very district dependent. So Mr. Barbieri, I'll turn it over to you to call on folks.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Mrs. Furtakis, I've been calling you Mary, and I apologize, but it was easier than Mrs. Furtakis, but I'll try and remember. You have a good relationship with Highline Public Schools in case we steal their mission statement so they don't sue us?
Absolutely. I've already talked to them about this. I have a very strong relationship with both the superintendent and many members of their board. I co-presented with their board chair on a number of occasions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mrs. Whitfield.
Sorry, I have so many opinions about all this. In the vision, one of the things that really jumped out for me in that first one is a joy of learning. And a lot of this comes back to having to do homework with my daughter all the time. And I actually really like Reading Plus. I think Reading Plus is really interesting that they put stories that are, really pertinent. There are little clips and you get to read through it. But the way that they're presented kind of is a little bit painful to do. And same thing with IXL. We do a lot of IXL in my house. And I just feel like I love school. I've always loved school. I thought school was the greatest thing ever. I excelled in it, so it made it so it was self-reinforcing. You know, people would tell me that I'm doing a great job, and that always made me feel really happy. But I can see on some of our children that they don't love to come to school, that they struggle with being there. They don't feel like it's for them, that they're not being seen and heard, and they don't want to do it. And that to me is really sad. And so when I see this joy of learning, like in 5 years, if we could have this district instill a joy of learning in our students, I really think we would just see our reading scores go through the roof, our math scores go through the roof, because kids would want to be there and they would feel engaged in their education. So I just love that piece, and it really resonated with me, just really because of all the homework I do. And watching her struggle through it is hard.
Someone else have a comment? Mrs. Andrews?
Well, I like the piece when we're trying to get our students ready. Many times our students start out in first grade and they really haven't mastered the kindergarten skills. And when we think about having children ready to be able to be successful by third grade, that we've got to look at the early portions. So the piece that I think about a lot is to make sure that we have our children ready when they enter kindergarten so that they can be successful by the end of the third grade.
Anyone else? Mrs. Ayala? Ms. Ayala?
Thank you. I had thought that adding dream somewhere to vision was something that I would like to see, because again, we're focusing to what we hope in the future for the graduates, as Dr. Robinson so eloquently put it, the portrait of a graduate. Who do we want them to be, right? And I think that piece from the mission, where we're leading with a holistic approach to get them to a point where they're successful, where they have dreams and goals, where they feel like whole people that are able to leave our district and go out into the global economy, which is a piece I liked, the globalness of what education means today in the 21st century and forward. I think that it's important that we think about who do we want that person to be, what qualities did that person acquire because of the great work of this district. So that was how I was trying to reframe it, because again, I went back to reading this, and to say it simply, it just didn't hit me. It has all these big, long words that if I read and I really try to understand mean something, but at first glance, it leaves me very uninspired.
Dr. Robinson?
Okay, so we're talking about vision right now, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
So, I don't know, in my mind, the vision is just going to be very long. Because I just feel like I want to detail a lot of bullet points in this vision, right? But I think that in the vision is where the vision is the how. Okay, so, right. So I think in the vision is where language such, including racially affirming goals. I actually like components of each one of these samples. I love that. I want excellence in there, however that gets defined. Now, it's something about the last one with shared responsibility of school at home and community. I think I don't like shared responsibility, though. And the only reason is because I've heard too many times where school district employees would essentially blame the parents, and that statement to me leaves room for saying you weren't doing your part, right? When in actuality, what I'm saying, the way I see equity work, if you are not so blessed that you can like sit with your child and do the homework with your child, that we would see to it that there's some kind of, some filling of that hole, whether it's after-school tutoring or it's a community-based program that supports education, whatever. But I don't want to, I don't like shared responsibility for that reason. I'm not really sure if I'm making myself clear, but I just don't want to have anything that says you didn't do your part, right?
For that, I can add a little context to the conversation that this district had that led to this. And it was around the exact issue that you're raising that goes back again to a basic word that I think I referenced when we spoke last time. If I didn't, it's one I usually say. In the education sector, in my humble opinion, the word "those" should be eradicated. Those kids, those parents, those neighborhoods, those schools. It's very marginalizing. It's used all the time. People who hear that said know exactly what it's referring to. And in its place is the word, should be the word our students, our families, our schools, our neighborhoods. And that indicates a collective responsibility and a shared ownership in the success of each of those. So that was the conversation that they were having and coming to an understanding that because of some of the changes and demographics happening in their district, they definitely had been treating historically marginalized groups as those, and that this was part of their culture shift to be talking about a shared responsibility for success.
Dr. Robinson?
So I think that we would need to have some significant culture change in Palm Beach County before those words would be viewed that way, right? That's in my opinion. I think something like collective effort or something. I don't know the word, but I think it's responsibility is the word that triggers me when in the context of Palm Beach County culture, which is to blame. That's just what happens. And and let me just say this is not unique to Palm Beach County or education. Doctors do it too. So if you're not responding to your medicine the way we think you should, we're going to blame you because you're not doing whatever you're supposed to do. So that's what happens when people are trying and they're unsuccessful. They blame the other person. So, yeah. Okay.
Great points. No, I appreciate that because you're bringing up a really important principle in any of this work, which is things that can be perceived as coming from a deficit place or deficit language. And if there are words that, because of your local context, trigger something that would be considered from a place of deficit, then it absolutely should be very intentionally looked at and an alternative put in place.
Vice Chairwoman Breaux?
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to what Ms. Ayala said. I felt the same way, uninspired by our vision. And I agree with Dr. Robinson when she was saying that certain words jump out. You look at someone, I looked at the words and the examples that we got, the things that jump out to me that I would love to see us work into our vision statement. And I don't have a problem with the lengthy vision statement. I think the mission needs to be short. I think the vision can be longer, but the words that jump out to me are cultural heritage, dream, foundation of equity or equity. We've got to get that in there. Mutual respect, cultural responsiveness, pursuit of excellence, and community. Maybe that's that word that replaces responsibility. And Dr. Robinson is right. That's going to take a big culture change in this district. But I think if those words are a part of it, we can start to drive that, because those are the words that really capture what I think we need to be. It's like our North Star, where we want to go, and those are the words that are going to get us there.
Would you be willing to repeat that list of words? Kathy was doing a wonderful job typing, but I'm not sure if she was able to capture each one that you shared.
Do you want me to go back? Because I have highlighted.
Yes, I have cultural heritage, dream, mutual respect, pursuit of excellence, community.
Well, you missed the right. So equity, we had foundation of equity or equity, mutual respect, pursuit of excellence, and community. So you got it all in
I was
my
gonna
New
say-
York speed.
This meeting is recorded, so I will be watching it tomorrow. Thank you.
Ms. McQuinn?
Oh, I can't stand it. Okay. So I agree. Short mission, vision is the how. It has all those words. I'm taking really good notes here too. So Kathy, you can let me know if you. I think though, and it goes back to what Dr. Robinson says, yeah, we need all of our community. We need all of that, but we have the responsibility. And I don't want to put, that's part of our strategic plan. It's some strategies that we employ, that we engage our communities and et cetera, all of that. I think I love the portrait of the graduate, and that's in there for however we do it. And then, we put in the racially affirming, the cultural heritage. Those are some things that mean something. But I think our words, every single word needs to be an important word. And so I'm going to go to the joy of learning. I guarantee you my grandson never, never, never will experience the joy of learning. He likes the joy of fishing. So, but he will learn, okay? So I don't even know if we can define joy. What's your joy, my joy? So I really love going to the words that we know exactly what it means for most people. And I can live with Dr. Robinson's excellence, but I don't even know if what you and I both agree on is excellent. So I'm putting it out there for very specific words. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
And I've got a specific word, if it hasn't already been said, is to inspire all students to attain the highest levels of achievement. And I haven't heard anyone say too much about the social and emotional piece there, not just the academic piece. The academic piece is very important, but the social and emotional piece, I think, needs to be somewhere.
Go ahead, Mr. Fotakis.
Yeah, I would concur with the social emotional piece, because that's actually getting back to your conversation around names in the mission. These are the things that create the conditions where people know that they are seen, that they are welcomed, that it's an inclusive environment, and all of that is part of social emotional well-being. And we know that when that's in place, that's where we see a lot of culture shift happening, because that gets into the heart of what's happening every day in your learning environment. Okay. All right. So what, just want to make sure in looking at this, is there any concept, word or phrase that we have not captured yet on the vision piece of this?
Dr. Robinson?
But in the vision somewhere, one of these paragraphs or bullet points is something has to talk about the staff, right? So I don't know exactly what the right words are, but we need to have staff that is also inspired, right? We have to address the socio-emotional wellness of our staff, right? And just like as a sidebar, I was in this conversation the other day about what I call the heavy lift of concentrated poverty and the burnout that happens there. And that's an equity issue. I'm just throwing that out for you now. But just the emotional burden that some staff has and experiences when, and worse because of the pandemic, but when they're doing everything they know to do, and maybe not having success or the level of success that they want, and then that's a burden on them. So somehow we have to, in here, in this whole vision, talk about how we not only support our staff professionally, but also emotionally, I think.
Ms. Furtakis, what do you think?
Yes, I mean, this is your teaching staff and your staff are, when we talk about equity and how our people are resourced, yes, it's a critical piece, because if you're experiencing trauma yourself, that's going to be getting translated across to the children that you're coming in contact with. And I do quite a bit of work on the social emotional learning in that space, and this has become a huge issue as a result of, I mean, it should have been an issue before if we were looking at our data with staff turnover and how we're losing people, and people not losing them just from your schools, but losing them from the profession, and the lack of supports there. And the pandemic has highlighted and daylighted that even more. So this issue of addressing, when you focus on social emotional tools for your staff, it's a twofer, because it's helping them for their own social emotional needs, and they're now in a space where they can also be teaching this to the students that they come in contact with. So it's an investment that yields dual benefits when we're talking about professional development around that. So it's definitely something to be considered. And as you move forward into your strategic plan, I've yet to see one that doesn't have a pillar that doesn't talk about staff in some way, shape, or form, because they're the ones who need your support to help you realize the vision that you're trying to create and the mission that you're trying to carry out. What I'm hearing, and I don't want to stop conversation if someone has something to say, but I do want to move you to a couple of points to see if we can get some consensus. What I am hearing on the vision is a desire to have it be not a short statement, one or two sentences, but something that is longer, that would allow you to expound on a number of concepts as your how. But again, since I can't see everyone, can you do a test of the room or take a temperature of the room, Mr. Barbieri, with a thumbs up, sideways, or down on that piece?
I see head shaking, thumbs up, so I think you got it.
Okay.
Mrs. McQuinn wanted to make a comment, though, if we could just pause a second.
I just wanted, okay, I know we wordsmith later. It's just, I like employees so much better than staff. I don't know why. More syllables. Softer syllables. I just like employee better, thank you.
Let's capture this. Everything's on the table right now. This one may be a little bit tougher. So, okay, you want it a little bit longer in the vision. In this second paragraph, the column where we put state for include as a component with its own paragraph as part of the vision. Would love to see if there are some concepts or areas that you would like to highlight as a part of this. I mean, it's clear to me one of them is this portrait of a graduate, which would be something that allows you to then backwards map what happens throughout your system. But that's just one I'm seeing. But I want it, since this is yours, I want to see, are there some, we're thinking broader and a category of something that's part of your how that you'd like to see a paragraph around. If we could generate some of those ideas, that would be great.
Dr. Robinson.
So part of my how is acknowledging the importance of families and communities and empowering them to be partners, like equal partners, but not with the responsibility piece. I'm still stuck on that. But I know that, we act as though only our employees can deliver anything called education. And it's not really true, right? And so, our systems have taken the voice away from some communities and some individuals in those communities who are ready, willing, and able to step up, and especially as we look at this COVID slide deal, right? And so I would like the how to include the acknowledging of the strengths, the talents, the power of the community, and especially those that we don't typically listen to. So, yeah, that's one of my house.
You're on, Ms. Fotakis.
Mr.
So,
Barbieri,
okay,
I just wanted to expand on what Dr. Robinson just said, because it really resonates with me and the nonprofit organizations in this community, and I think that should be added in. So the communities and outside organizations within this community that do support, because I mean, they are always asking how they can help the schools, and so to be able to actually work with them more effectively, I think could give us extra benefits for all of the students and the employees.
Mrs. McQuinn?
I'm going to continue to put my plug in that that we keep this focused on our students and that our community involvement be in our strategic plan as to how we do this for our students. And I'll come back to the words that I loved is our racially affirming, the equity, the cultural heritage, knowing them by name, et cetera. Those are all student. And then how we do that is through our strategic plan. Just my preference, but I'll keep bringing us back to that.
Mrs. Andrews, then Dr. Robinson.
Yes, there's so many different type of stakeholders, and certainly the community is one. But we have our elected officials. We have many times educators who are actually retired from the system, so that we have a whole abundance of stakeholders that we can identify that have so many resources that can be inclined to be used to supplement what we do here in the classroom as well as with the school district.
Dr. Robinson?
So one of the things that, since we keep talking about student-centered, so yeah, and people come and they say that they want to help the school. I want them to help the students, right? And the school looks better as a outcome of that, right? Because what I don't want to do is positively reinforce this school grading game that goes on, because so many children get hurt in that I really, when they want to help, let's talk about the children that they're going to help. And actually, that's always been positively received when I would kind of turn the conversation a bit, so.
Ms. Fotakis?
I want to throw out a couple of ideas for consideration for you in looking at this, since the vision encompasses different aspects of your system. And I'm wondering, you've touched on the social emotional well-being of students and employees. And we've talked a little bit about academic outcomes. And there was a preference for including the word excellence in whatever your final draft is. But a couple of things I'm not hearing that cover different aspects, and it just because of the way our conversation has gone, but I want to raise them for your consideration. One would be, as part of your vision, what about parity in your facilities?
Did you say parity?
Yes.
Doesn't parity sound more like equal than equitable?
What you would need to be looking, that's why I used the word parity, because it's not exactly the same, but if you were looking at your facilities, would you be able to say to someone, yes, we have invested the resources into ensuring that these are facilities, buildings that are contributing to equitable access and opportunity?
So I see parity would work when you're comparing physical structure, but not students. So parity to me, when you're talking about students, is every student gets exactly the same thing, which is not what we want, right? But certainly when we're talking about, and Mrs. Paul knows exactly what school I'm referencing when I won't say it, but when we're looking at parity for schools, every school should be appealing and aesthetically pleasing to the parents that are looking at them so that they don't see a difference, you know, so parity in that respect. But does that really belong in a vision statement when we're talking about?
That's what I'm referring to, because you're talking about your district.
Okay.
And like I said, there's different aspects of your district. There's your students, there's your staff, there's your facilities, there's your budget allocation. You know, is part of your vision going to be distributing resources as we broadly determined them, and your budget, is it going to be done in a manner that promotes equity? You know, is that something you want called out in a vision statement as to how you're going, as part of your how? And because again, this is part of your how, and so it's requiring lots of different things.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Let me just say yes, yes, and more yes. I would really, really like it if we thought about how we distribute resources within this district. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't make sense to me, so I'm constantly having meetings with Ms. Paul to ask her, you know, what's happening at this school versus that school, and how come they've got something that my schools don't have. So, you know, I think having that in there would be amazing, and talking about how we, you know, we have such limited resources, how we give out all the resources and make sure that they're going to the places that need them and the biggest problem areas first. I think it's a wonderful idea.
Mrs. Andrews?
We just don't only have academic gaps, we have facility gaps, we have structural gaps. So I think when you're talking about the budget and how to close these gaps, you've got to kind of look at the funding that's needed. So you have to assess the whole district, the total district, your physical facility, your curriculum, your teachers, all of these gaps. We've got gaps because we have teachers who have less experience than others when you start talking about equity, which means that we may have to put money in the budget to be able to recruit and inspire the best talent to go into the schools that need it. So when you start talking about this parity, it's a big deal because we know where our schools are as it relates to parity and what kinds of things that will need to be done. And some of that is going to be financial. Some of it can be otherwise, but we need to make sure that's somewhere in the statement because we've got a lot of places to look at right here in this big Palm Beach County.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Just wanted to add one more thought, and you guys can think about where this fits best. But we have this whole idea around the whole child that we talk about, and I think we should try to include that. It includes so many different aspects of social emotional learning, you know, feeding, which is huge to me always, employee wellness, physical environment, family engagement, community involvement. So social and emotional climate, counseling, PE, nutrition. So it's like, as we talk about the whole child, if that fits into probably maybe in the how, but also into the vision, I think that would be a really good way to capture the work that's already being done in this district and then really highlight it so that going forward we really think about that as a core component of the work that we're doing.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. So I'm going to push back on the word parity. I don't know, it sounds like equal to me too, and I just don't want to have anything that's misinterpreted. I do think that it needs to talk about the resources, including the budget. You know, the way I always say it is disproportionately provided to those in most need, but like, you know, it would be different words in the vision statement. And I think, I'm not sure if I can clearly see what Ms. Whitfield is saying. I mean, I get the concept of the whole child, but I'll follow it. But I think for me, that portrait of the graduate is the description of the whole child graduating, and what are all those components of that young person. And I guess maybe you're talking about the back mapping of the different, okay, I'm catching on. But, okay, so yeah, but I absolutely think that the vision statement should talk about the resources.
Ms. Riftakis?
Okay, and so we're going to, unfortunately, with our time constraints, wrap this up at this time for this portion of it. But you've generated a ton of wonderful ideas, concepts, words, including words you don't want to use and that we should be very cognizant of. And would just encourage any of the board members, if there are other things that come up for you as you've had a chance to reflect on this piece, please don't hesitate to provide those to Kathy, and she'll be very happy to incorporate them into this document, which will be written up and as a part of your work as we continue going forward. And we did come to consensus that you do want something longer for your vision, which is actually going to be very helpful for you to be able to incorporate all the things you want to see in it as you are developing your how. And this is then going to feed into your strategic planning work, because these things that you're talking about and identifying in the vision are absolutely going to be showing up in the strategic plan, because this how has to be operationalized over the next 5 years as you move forward on that. So thank you so much for your engagement on this piece. And I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Tierney.
Can we put the slides back up, Mark? Thank you.
Go ahead.
So in consultation with Mrs. Vertakis, we wanted to make sure that everything that the board has kind of tasked the superintendent and his staff with is reflected in this timeline. Again, you know, this is something Dr. Noyes said in his comments. You know, we've heard we want equity as a pillar in the strategic plan, but we need to set a strong foundation to make sure that that does happen. And so, as Mary shared and Mr. Tierney shared in the beginning of this workshop, you know, that entails the foundational work around completing, you know, the mission and vision revisions. To Dr. Robinson's point, really making sure that we all coalesce around a working definition for equity, since, you know, Mrs. Vertakis has been very, you know, pushing us to make sure that this isn't something that's just coming from the school board, but that we workshop with others in the community, especially our students, and then making sure that those changes are reflected in our equity policy, not just the definition of equity, but also the accountability piece, and making sure that we hold ourselves accountable for this work. And so I did want to say we invited Santiago Alvarez today, but he has a lot of homework. So I do have a meeting scheduled with him to debrief. So I know he's, you know, not the only student voice, but we're trying to leverage him as a stepping stone to make sure we get to everyone. And so really thinking about you know, his ideas, he said this at the last board meeting, how to engage the students. So again, I'll circle back with him, because again, you know, we're talking about students, but want to make sure that they're represented in this conversation. So you see some times there, Mr. Burke and Ms. Knust were here talking about the budget process. So again, you know, if there are any changes or priorities that need to be surfaced prior to the final budget adoption, in light of everything that's happening with the state budget, you know, it's just something for us to think about. And as Mary said, our definition of resources just needs to be broadened. We just need to continually remind ourselves that, yes, dollars matter, but there are other things that we should be looking at. And then we talked on November 10th about the board workshops and aligning those to the desired outcomes of our equity policy, right? So what is our current state as it relates to those outcomes, and then having the board talk about what is our ideal state, how do we get there? Before we can talk about that, we need to know where we are. And as part of that process, incorporating the marginalized voices, students, parents, teachers, to come to the table to really speak to that. Also leveraging the work that's going on in the community. I know the Children's Services Council is doing work on equity. I participated in the West Palm Beach work that Mayor James is doing and his work, listening to the elders and how powerful that was. How can we make sure that, again, as a county, we're kind of coalescing around this, because it seems like, y'all aren't the only ones going on this journey. So leveraging those resources, since we know they're scarce, but making sure that we all kind of end up in a place that's better for everybody in Palm Beach County. So we'll come back and bring that to the board in January so y'all can see the plan, and they'll also be tied to the barriers that Mrs. Furtakis helped identify in her one-on-one conversations with you. So kind of this alignment of, desired outcomes, who in the community or even from Council of Great City Schools can we leverage to come give y'all some outside kind of best practices tied to that desired outcome, what work the district has done, to get to our current state, identify what has to happen to get us there. So this portrait of a graduate in a lot of ways as well, I think will tie into that work. And then the barriers that y'all identified in your one-on-one conversations earlier. So I think I see a question. Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I actually just wanted to ask a little bit of a question to the superintendent about this work. My understanding is that we are out of money to pay Mrs. Furtakis to keep going on this work, and that it's going to be largely internal from now on. I'm a little concerned about that. I know you're wonderful, Ms. Villavicencio, but I don't want to overburden you or other staff, and I'm a little concerned because sometimes we get stalled when things are just internal, and I like this outside push. I kind of just wanted to ask the superintendent his thought on going forward. This work, we've tried it so many times. Well before I got here, I know it started, and we've done it a few times since I've been here, and I'm afraid to lose the momentum we've gained. So if you have any thoughts, I would love to hear on what you think on that.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Mr. Tierney. We talked about it a little earlier today.
To Ms. Furtakis, the grant and her contract expires basically at the end of this workshop. We've found it to be tremendously helpful, so we're going to continue to search for outside funding sources to help us guide us in this work, and then we will handle internally the things that we're able to, having lived through the creation of the last strategic plan. So it's going to be a combination of doing the mechanics of the things that we saw and now know how, with hopefully bringing back the expertise as we identify additional funds.
Mr. Tierney, I agree. I think Mrs. Furtakis has been, exceptionally helpful, and I would hate that we weren't going to continue working with her. I think if we approach the Education Foundation, what's more important to them than how we make sure that we teach every child in this district and give them the resources they need. So I would reach out to, President Gavrilos and ask if they give us some help with keeping her with us for a while.
Absolutely.
Dr. Robinson?
So I would support that too. I have to say though, Mrs. Whitfield, I don't remember in 20 years the board talking about equity, right? Oh, so you're talking about the strategic plan?
The mission and vision and all that work to tie in equity. I think, we've touched on it, but we've never got this
on this equity thing. But I definitely support asking somebody to find the money to continue working with Mrs. Furtakis. Did I just mess it up?
Nope.
Furtakis. Okay. So, but I also want to throw out there too. So, the Palm Beach County is a member of the Government Alliance for Racial Equity. And they have toolkits and stuff. Like I really have not explored their work, but I would ask maybe that Kathy V and Mr. Tierney would look at what is available through them. I think James Green is really the main point of contact, but I know that they have some kind of like tools where you walk through whether or not your organization is actually working towards equity, but I haven't seen them. And so I think that we could maybe use those to provoke our thinking. But definitely, I do think that we need to bring Ms. Furtakis back to lead us, because if we do this right, it's going to get tense. So, thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
Absolutely. We have so much heavy lifting. We have to bring Ms. Furtakis back. We're just babies beginning this process, and you have done this work. So ditto, Erica, Mrs. Whitfield, and Dr. Robinson. I just want to make sure I'm on this that we have to find the money. I mean, when you put it on the inside, it's different. We need this outside approach to tell us those kinds of things, or at least educate us on the things that we need to find so that we can do the kinds of things that need to be done for this equity lens to be effective and successful for our children.
I guess we kind of put you on the spot, Ms. Vatakis. Whether you like it or not, we want you to stay, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you. This has been very, I appreciate all of the comments, and I would be very honored to continue working with you if it can be worked out. I totally agree from the years I've done this that it's really important to honor the work going on internally and your internal expertise. And it's really helpful to have somebody external who can look at things from a different perspective and who can continue pushing. And that, I want to go back to the timeline very quickly, because this is one of the tools that I was recommending you use for a number of reasons. And the specific things on that timeline are related to the board's work and the board's engagement in these processes, so that you have a visual of where things are going, and it becomes an accountability tool for you to be having, to be able to ask questions around, okay, we said we were going to be at this point, what's going on? It's also to provide you with some assurance that the work is going on, as well as to provide a bit of a framework as this work goes forward for the types of presentations you'll be getting, because you should be getting updates regularly as to how these different things are progressing and moving along. It also helps staff know what expectations are, and it goes back to that circle of accountability that we talked about last time, where the board has a role in doing this, and staff and employees, I'll change my language, employees also have their roles in doing it, and it needs to be working together. It's also to help show you some of the intersections of what's going on and what would be happening at the same time, because you do have a structure that allows you to do that. So the timeline piece fulfills a lot of different needs for people to know we're progressing, holding ourselves accountable. If we have to adjust some things, then we're having an intentional conversation about it, and it goes on the timeline. I've also suggested doing it color-coded so that you know everything that's related to your strategic plan would be in one, anything related to the board's workshops that they're going to be doing for their own personal and collective learning around equity and racial equity, so that you can see very easily how you're moving on your continuum.
Mr. Chairman and the board, I think so let me just go ahead and commit to the request of the board. So the beautiful part about this, and the reality is, we absolutely need someone like Mrs. Vatakis, but we also need to build internal capacity in order for this to continue beyond the future, right? And so when I say internal capacity, I mean of the board, of staff, and then start expanding that reality. So what I can commit to, when Mike forced us to look at our budgets, my team's budgets, and we started reducing, I was able to reduce my budget by greater than 10%. I think like 25. And we also have friends of the district that we will be asking. So we will make it happen. So I'll find a way.
All right. Vice Chairwoman Brill, and then Dr. Robinson. You pass Dr. Robinson.
So I would ask also that Dr. Fenoy send to each of the board the schedule of upcoming Racial Equity Institute workshops, because I think all except for one of us has been one time, and I think I just think it's an important framing for us to really lead into what we're talking about. But my question is, so what's the next step with the resource allocation with the equity lens? Because that is a heavy lift. So what's the next step with that?
I can jump in here just very quickly, because this is where you already have work that's been done that just hasn't been accessed. You had a review done by ERS, Educational Research Services, and they did an analysis, and I actually use a lot of their materials when trying to create a structure for equitable resource allocation. They have done that. I mean, it's laid out, it's very you can have very intentional conversations about the decisions being made in different categories of resource allocation for the district. So you're not starting from scratch. It's activating things that have been there and sitting there, and now we're trying to put it in this framework on a timeline and calling some things out to help it move forward.
Okay.
Dr. Robinson?
May I also ask Dr. Fenoy to consider asking principals their thoughts on, now I get many principals may not be familiar with equity as a concept, but still get their input in terms of how they think our funding formulas do not support the student needs. If, I guess you might need to wordsmith that, but I would like to hear from the principals as well, for just to consider their input.
Ms. McQuinn?
I think Dr. Robinson was on the board at the time, I don't remember, but when I was a principal, and I was trying to look back, when I first learned the word that equitable is not equal. I was a new principal about 25 years ago, and I don't see that we've come much further. But that's when I learned it. I've never forgotten. Equal is not equitable. So just the education on that piece, I think, is going to be important.
Mrs. Whitfield?
I just want to tell Dr. Robinson I am signed up for the January racial equity. I'm excited to go, so if anybody wants to come, I think it would be fascinating to have us, multiple board voices in there. Obviously, it would have to be advertised, but I think it would be really impactful, and it's virtual, so we don't have to go in the same room or building, so it'll be really nice. I'm looking forward to it.
Mrs. Andrews?
And thank you. And Mr. Burke, you're an important point, even though it's not all about the financial piece. But when we start looking at how schools are allocated their funds, and we know where these schools are, we know where these children are, and we've had our basic premise of how we do business here in Palm Beach County for a long time, based on this is how we do it, because this is the way it's been done. And that is a heavy lift when we begin to restructure that from the lens of equity to get to where we need to go for our children.
And I think just the last thing is, the work, Dr. Fenoy said this is meaningful work. It does take time. I know with the work that Dr. Sheffield and Mr. Oswald are doing around the student academic support plan, there's talks of what will it take so that as we engage finance, HR, operations, it's, okay, can we do in 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years? You all talked about this being a culture shift. That takes time. I know in talking to Mrs. Furtakis, Dr. Fenoy, and his leadership team with Mr. Tierney, you got to get everybody on board, or, the changes that y'all are talking about, the people that actually have to implement it at the school level, it might not happen. So we got to bring everybody together now with the board's direction, make sure we craft that meaningful plan, give them the voice in that process, and make sure that we're being strategic about when things are being rolled out, because if we mess with that budget too much, I worry about, some of those timelines. So we'll come back with a plan in January, and that's part of that strategic planning process. But everything is dependent on what's up there. So if we have to go slower, that's something the board can give us direction on as well.
Dr. Robinson?
So I want to request that ERS report get shared with us, because I don't know what I called it in my handy dandy laptop, but I don't find it. And then the other thing is, I just want to throw out there, since we haven't the audacity to dream of fixing this thing, is if we can put in the mix of the conversation right now, to take action later, a curriculum audit. Right? Because I know that 5th grade math at school A is not the same as 5th grade math at school B, right? And we need somebody outside to come tell us that, because.
Dr. Robinson, actually, when COVID started, we were privileged to get a funder to get Johns Hopkins University to do a curriculum audit. We paused it when COVID started, so it's just a matter of me making a phone call to get that reactivated.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. Since we have the equity lens, let us pull back out the New York University study. I don't know if Mary has seen that, but
She has.
I'd like to see it again because it's talking about just what she's talking about. All that information is here. We haven't looked at it in a long time, and I'd like to know what we've done with it and what we can do now that we have an equity lens.
And I know Mr. Tierney is going to close us up with some next steps, but this makes me excited because, you know, we had a planning meeting about the first board workshop maybe being a mini root cause analysis with the NYU study, with the ERS analysis for the board to see, and similar to what we did today, y'all talk about, you know, what is causing inequities in the system. And it's not, let's not talk about money because we know money is always going to be the thing we point to. What are the real things so that you as a board can explore that using these resources? And then that will really set the tenor and the tone, I think, for the rest of the work. So we'll work on that, but I appreciate y'all highlighting those things because I think that's where I know we were headed. Yeah.
Mr. Tierney?
So for our next steps, we're going to work towards finalizing the revisions on mission and vision. I'll send you some drafts, mission and visions, prior to the next workshop so you can reflect on that. Certainly this was a good investment of time. This will be worthy of a further investment in time, but as you saw on that timeline, this is a sequence of events, one building on the previous, so it's not a conversation that can go on forever. While we're defining mission and vision, we're going to have to define equity as well. We'll do that concurrently, and then I'm going to draw your attention on this slide to both the equity policy, because it makes no sense to define equity for the first time without looking through that newly defined ends at that policy and see is it serving the purpose that we want. And then also the Diversity and Equity Committee hopefully will help us and help the board work toward the definition of equity. So we may well ask them to come up with some draft definitions of equity in order to at least jumpstart that conversation in January. As far as reaching the inclusion of students, we've started that conversation with our student representative. He spoke so eloquently and passionately about that, and we've began that being fully cognizant of the fact that the student voices that we most need to hear are not going to have a seat in this boardroom, will probably take the most effort. So we recognize we have to cast our net widely on that, and we'll do that. And this was the point. As we wind down, I was going to say some kind words about Mary, but based on the sentiments expressed by the board already, I think that would be redundant. So I'll turn it over to Mary for checkout.
Thank you. Again, I want to check out with you the same way that we checked in, and to get just a sense from you. Again, Mr. Barbieri, I'm going to rely on you to let it go around the room with your colleagues, but would like to close this out with either you sharing either a word or a phrase about how you're leaving our time together.
Mrs. McQuinn, would you like to go first?
Yeah, well, I would, except that I've missed one word there about our time together. What was that word?
Oh, just a word or a phrase that is reflective of how you're leaving our time together.
How I'm seeing our time?
Leaving our time together.
Leaving our time. Encouraged because I see that we are scheduled to, number one, have Ms. Fotakis back, and to really, because she makes us keep moving, gives us time, but makes us keep moving, and she can leave us anytime she wants, so we have to behave. So encouraged.
Go ahead, Ms. Ayala.
Thank you. Feeling like the future looks promising.
Mrs. Whitfield?
I'm super hopeful. This was a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoyed this. And I don't know if you guys know, I have baby's first Christmas in a week. And so I'm kind of thinking a lot about that. So I'm very, very excited about all of it. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
Moving forward.
Dr. Robinson?
So before I tell you, can I get my portrait of a graduate conversation started in January? Because I'm just so stuck that I don't know, somehow the mission and vision before really having these conversations seems out of place to me, but whatever. But, so where am I? I am maintaining hope.
That's better than skeptical. Good. Vice Chairwoman Brill.
Thank you, and my word is pleased, because I believe that we are going to get where we want to get.
And I get to pick all the words you already used. Hopeful, I'm pleased, I'm happy we had Mrs. Fertakis here to help us get started on this. I know Dr. Robinson and I have been here the longest, and I've heard her try to get this done for so many years, and I thought I tried to help, but I guess I didn't because we never really got it done. But I'm happy this time that we have Mrs. Fertakis to help us get through this and hopefully get to the end of a very long-awaited project. So, if there's
Project,
not a project,
not a project, a transformation of this school district.
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I'll take your wordsmithing. Yes, no problem. Mrs. Fertakis, we
Dr.
hope you.
Fenoy? Dr. Fenoy?
I'm sorry, Dr. Fenoy.
No,
I don't know.
I'm good. I leave this conversation determined. And so, just, for business purposes, I just want to make sure that the chief of staff and his team know all of the documents that the board needs to reviewed. For the deputy superintendent, let's talk about the John Hopkins curriculum audit, because we can just start that over. That money's already been allocated from the outside source. So, no, I'm determined, and I think I'm just very proud of us putting one foot in front of the other.
Mr. Fertakis, we hope you have a very happy holiday season, and we're looking forward to seeing you back with us in January.
Thank you for and I just want to commend all of you. This is hard work, and you're diving in, and you're allowing yourselves to get uncomfortable and speak your truth and upholding the norms that we've talked about. And my checkout word would be grateful. Again, I'm grateful for the time and grateful for the work that you're doing, and just want to encourage you. This is going to be making a big impact on your students and those you serve, and I know that that's important to you. So thank you.
You're welcome. You might want over the break get a letter from that school district and make sure that we're covered. Our general counsel probably would like to have that.
Not a problem. I'd be happy to connect you with any of these folks.
All right, thank you. Board members, do you have anything else? Mr. Superintendent? We need a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mrs. Whitfield, second by Ms. Ayala. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried 7-0. Happy holidays, everyone.